Hi Year 7, it's Mrs. Reed and welcome to Lesson 12. Today we are going to be writing and in fact we're going to be writing a story. Now I'm going to be guiding you through this today, but we're aiming to write a short 4-paragraph story. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing that you need to do, as we do every lesson please, is to make sure that you're ready. You've got your exercise book, you've got a pen, you may wish to have a coloured pen or pencil for marking. And once you've got those things please, can you write our date and title at the top of your page and underline them with a ruler. Pause the video and do that now. Okay, let's have a look at today's task first of all. No writing yet. So today we're going to write what we call a problem-solved story. So in fact, quite a lot of the stories we probably have read are a problem-solved story. Do we think that the magic finger might be a problem-solved story? Let's check to find out. So the different parts of the story are this. Part 1 will be the opening. So that bit will introduce us to the main character and where the action takes place. Part 2 introduces a problem that the character faces. Part 3 offers a solution to the problem, so how the problem can be solved. And part 4 offers us a happy ending, some kind of conclusion to the story, normally that shows us that solving the problem was a good thing and it's made the person's or the character's life better. I wonder if we can see the magic finger actually as a problem-solved story. In fact, in the beginning we're introduced, aren't we, to the little girl. A problem arises when she sees the Gregg family who are hunting and shooting animals. A problem also occurs when she uses her magic finger actually, and the magic causes them to turn into sort of a cross between a human and a duck. The solution, well, the problem is solved really when Mr. Gregg and his family realise that hunting and shooting the animals was wrong, and they are finally turned, aren't they, back into their human selves at the end of the story where they go back to their home. It's quite happy. They're out in the garden feeding the birds. Yeah, I think it probably does fit that structure quite nicely. So are we up for the challenge today? We're going to do this, write a 4-part story. And as I say, I'm going to guide you through each step. Okay, so here are the pictures that we'll be using in today's lesson. And just like we would when we're in the classroom, we use the pictures to help us to tell the story, and we make inferences about what must have happened, or we try to add in the details that we are not directly shown in the picture. So our first step is always to kind of tell the story verbally. If we can say it out loud first, that is really going to help us to be able to write it down. So let's have a look at part 1. Can you see that in the top corner? Point at it on the screen. And let's look at the names. We've got Alex. Can you see what Alex here is doing? Yes, he appears to be playing the violin. We've got Carol and Peter, who are sat on the sofa. And Misty, can you see who Misty is in the picture? Yeah, we can see Misty the cat on the floor. Now look at that cat's expression. In fact, you might look at Carol and Peter's expressions too. What do they help us to understand about Alex's violin playing? He doesn't seem to be that good, does he? Okay, so part 2. Okay, well there's a problem. Alex is upset perhaps. Maybe he's not happy, but he's not playing well. Alex ran up to his room and looked at a poster of his hero. Ah, okay. I wonder what Alex thinks then when he looks at the poster of his hero. The next night, he begins to practice. So this is our solution. So we're going to need to add in lots of information here to say what happens when he begins to practice. And at the end, well, we can see Alex back in the living room playing again to Carol and Peter and other people. But something looks different this time. Okay, I'm going to ask you to pause the video here and just work through. You could do this on your own, with a partner, if you've got somebody nearby, and just tell them the story out loud. What can you see is happening in each picture, and how does it progress from part 1, part 2, part 3, on to part 4? Pause the video and spend no more than 2 minutes telling the story out loud. Okay, now that you've done that, it's time to look at the vocabulary box at the bottom of the screen. And I'm going to point at them and read them as we go. So the first word we've got here is January. Okay, that's important because there's a month there that tells us when things take place. And if I look across my vocab box, I get to another word here, look, June. So another month. In fact, this can help me tell the story. January might relate to the first picture when Alex first begins to play his violin. June, that might relate to the final part of the story, where Alex is playing his violin, but this time he seems to really have got better and improved. Let's look at the other words and see if they can help us tell the story. So we have January, practice, celebrated, screeched, inspired, strings, June, and bow. So some of these words are linked to the violin. In fact, I've put that word in the blue box because that's also going to help us to tell the story. A bow, that's the bit that Alex is holding in his hand. And the strings are what he puts the bow across on the instrument to make sound. When he first does this, does it look like it makes a good sound? No, I don't think from their facial expressions that they're really enjoying Alex's playing. In fact, there's a word at the bottom here that might help me to describe what Alex's violin sounds like when he's first beginning to learn. Can you see which word? I think it's the word screeched. That doesn't sound like a pleasant sound, does it? Something screeches. And I could imagine that the bow being dragged across the strings by a new violin player probably makes that kind of sound. Which word best tells us then what happens at the end? Can you identify it? Which one tells us that by the end Alex's violin playing has really improved? That's it here, look, celebrated. I can see that the family are happy and are now celebrating. Okay, let's tell the story. We'll come back to this bit at the end. These are our checks. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is write part 1. Part 1 introduces the main character and where the action takes place. So we're going to write part 1 and tell just what happens in this picture. In fact, we're going to start with the part that tells when. And we're going to use the word January from our vocab box. So, I would like you to pause the video here and write me 2 to 3 sentences. Tell me what happens in this picture. Start with the phrase, in January. Pause the video and do that now. Okay, well done. So you should have now 2 to 3 sentences that say what happened in this picture. I'm going to show you my sentences now and we can compare them. And if you want to, you can add to your sentences too. Let's look. Okay, so I have written, in January, comma, Alex began to play the violin, full stop. Can you see that nice clear sentence tells us when the action takes place, who the character is, and what they're doing? I then describe the sound that the violin makes. The bow screeched across the strings, full stop. That then allows me to talk about the other characters named in the picture. Carol, comma, Peter, and even Misty the cat found it hard to listen to. I've tried to use a list here, so I've got my comma to mark out items in the list, apart from the last one, which I've added with the word and. One thing that's really important to note here is that there are lots of names. So using capital letters for Alex, Carol, Peter, and Misty are really important. Okay, pause the video and check your capital letters. If you want to borrow any of my sentences, you can add them now. Okay, part 2 then. This is a new paragraph. We're going to explain the problem that the character faces. Okay, so we've been given a sentence we can use here. Paragraph 2 begins, Alex ran up to his room and looked at his poster of his hero. Okay, so this is clearly somebody that Alex looks up to. Perhaps it's a famous musician or even a violin player that Alex wants to be like. The character has identified the problem that he knows he's really not that good at the moment and he wants to be better. In fact, we are going to use that sentence to help us tell the story here. And we're also going to be a bit clever. We're going to use a sentence that begins with an if. So you could try that verbally first. If he, that's Alex, if he did what might happen? Okay, have a go at saying a sentence out loud. If Alex, then what could happen? I'm thinking that maybe if Alex practices, then he can be just as good. Okay, are you ready to write? Let's get your pen in your hand. And I want you to leave two line spaces before you start your next sentence. Your next sentence will say, Alex ran up to his room and looked at his poster of his hero. And then you can add 2 more sentences to say what else is happening. Pause the video and do that now, please. Right, let's do the same again and let's compare your writing to mine. Okay, so I've said, Alex ran up to his room and looked at the poster of his hero. I said, if he practiced enough, I need a comma here. If he practiced enough, comma, he hoped to be as good. And the final sentence, I've used a word from our vocab box, and that word is inspired. If you're feeling inspired, you're feeling motivated, like it's something that you really want to try to do. So I thought that might be a good word to apply here. Okay, check your writing, and if you want to use anything from my part of the story, you can add it into paragraph 2 now. That leaves us on to paragraph 3. Now we're going to explain how the problem is solved. We're given a sentence starter to use. Look at the top of the screen. Here, it says, the next night, comma. So starting with a part that tells when, followed by a comma. The next night, he began to practice. ... So we need to say what happens now in this picture. Okay. We might want to include a sentence that includes the exact words Alex said. Okay. So starting with this sentence, the next night, comma, he began to practice, tell me what happens next. Make sure that you leave two line spaces before you write paragraph 3. Pause the video and write your 2 to 3 sentences now. Okay, let's compare to mine. So I wrote this. The next night, comma, Alex began to practice. He played for hours while Misty watched from the bed. Alex wanted to impress his family and be the best violin player. Okay. Can you see in my 3 sentences, I've tried to describe what I could see in the picture and what Alex was trying to achieve, showing how he's trying to solve his problem. All right. Check your sentences, check you're happy with them, and if you want to use any of mine, you can. Right, let's move on to the final part of our story. Part 4 is a happy ending. This concludes the story, and it shows how solving the problem is a good thing. What's the happy ending to this story? Okay, so Alex has learned to play the violin. In fact, it seems that Alex has learned to play so well that his family, including Carol and Peter, are impressed. There's a word in the box that can help me describe this scene, and that word is celebrated. So we are going to try and describe what happens here. I'm going to start with a sentence that tells when. So my sentence begins in June, comma. So tell me what next. In June, what did Alex do? Write your 2 to 3 sentences to describe the happy ending. Now, pause the video. Well done. Okay, now let's look at my example. I've said that in June, comma, Alex played a game for his whole family. He played really well. Peter and Carol celebrated his success. Misty seemed to enjoy watching him too. Okay, What I want you to check in your final paragraph, please, is 2 things. Number 1, have you used a comma after the part that tells when at the start of the paragraph? And number 2, have you used the verb celebrated? If you haven't used the verb celebrated, can you write a sentence using that word now, please? You can use my example if you wish. Pause the video and do that now. Okay, finally. So your work today should look like 4 paragraphs on the page, with 2 line spaces between each one. You might have been using the vocabulary from the box. So what I would like you to do is to use a coloured pen or a highlighter and circle in your work where you have used the words from the vocab box. Can you find them? See if you can find the words January and June and celebrated. Perhaps you've even used a few more. Okay, so Mastery Check 3 is the one that I'm most interested in today. That's, have I paragraphed my work correctly? This should mean there are 4 clear sections of writing on your page with a space between each one, so I can see the 4 different parts of a story. All right, really well done for today. We've worked through writing a short story. I would like you to send me some pictures of your work, and I hope you have a really lovely day.